206.
Mic check, mic check.
Salutations.
1112. 1-2.
Yo, what's up, world? Welcome to another episode of the 206. As usual, I'm joined by the co-hosts and the homies, Jason and Tim. And for today's episode, I can't begin to explain to you all how freaking excited I am. You guys know back when you're children, we were always making those sarcastic comments when we were trying to be snippy with someone. We say, is it really that hard? It's not rocket science. Well, funny enough, today we might be talking about a little rocket science because we have a rocket scientist with us here. It's none other than our good friend George Hatcher, and we're going to be going into many topics, everything space related. George has a lot of experience. He currently works at Keck Observatory in Hawaii. He has job experience working at NASA, and he's pretty much a space aficionado, to say the least. He even had the opportunity to participate in the Mars One mission, which was, I forgot. You can correct me. It was either Elon Musk or that other guy that owns Virgin or whatever. But pretty much they were funding a mission to Mars, and he was one of the finalists. So before we get into any space related topics, any of his prior work history, let's just go back to the beginning and start out by asking you, George, how did you fall in love with space to begin with?
Well, first, thank you for letting me be here. I'm really excited for this conversation. It goes all the way back to like age 2 for me. My mom got me a Lego set that was based on the Apollo moon mission, and I would sit up in my attic bedroom playing with that moon set and imagining what it would be like to be an astronaut before I even really understood what an astronaut was.
Tight.
But it really never ended after that. You know, I was captivated by Legos, and then moving through school, the more that I learned about science and math, the more excited I became. And then I got really lucky. I was able to go to school and study aerospace engineering. And when I finally got to the last year of college was when everything clicked into place. And all of those incredibly difficult courses paid off because they were all foundational for things like orbital mechanics and aerodynamics and aerospace structural design. So that was when I said, yeah, I'm definitely in the right place. And then I got really lucky. I mean, I got a job at NASA straight out of school. It's been a lot of luck, a lot of good fortune in my life.
So you start out playing with Lego sets, excuse me. You know, hey, look, audience, it's been a long day. If you guys knew how hard it was to even start today's recording, we know we're running an hour late. Many obstacles in the way that I need not get into, but my brain's a little all over the place. So bear with me if I make any more slips of the tongue if I make any more slips of the tongue during the remainder of this episode. Anyway, so he started out with playing with Lego sets, and in the moon. I forgot what the first thing you said it was. A little moon. It was like a replica of some Apollo mission. So you start out with that, and then in high school, like, did you start to actually like things about space, like, basic understanding, like, oh yeah, what are planets like, or how many planets are there, or like what's the solar system versus a galaxy versus a supercluster? Like, when did your knowledge of space itself begin to increase? And then you studied aerospace engineering, right, in college. But when you were studying that, out of high school, did you know that it was going to lead into like a job, like where you end up actually being like, I don't know what the official title was. I call it a rocket scientist because you worked on like launching the rockets into space. Mm-hmm. It's like, did you know that, when you were picking that major, just like, okay, yeah, I want to do this, therefore I'm going to study aerospace engineering, or you just liked aerospace engineering in general, and then it led to, through luck, the job at NASA?
Oh, everything is. It seems like when I reflect on how I got to this point, I can only be thankful because so many things had to fall into place. And so growing up, it's like, yeah, I love rockets and the moon and stuff. But what I was obsessed with as a kid was airplanes. And in high school, I did 4 years of JROTC, like Army JROTC, because I thought I was going to go into the military. I wanted to learn how to be a pilot because that, to me, was the clearest path towards being a NASA astronaut. I mean, there's still, to this day, half of every astronaut class is ex-military. So It made the most sense to me. And I got to senior year and I got scholarships to the 3 main branches of the military to go to college and then join the military afterwards. And every single one of them, I said, "Hey, will you train me how to fly?" I mean, even with the Army, I'm like, "Yeah, I'll do rotary wing aircraft. That's no big deal." None of them. This was 1997. None of them were letting people who had glasses get into the pilot program. Now that's changed. Like shortly thereafter, within a decade of 97, they were letting people with corrective lenses get into the pilot program. But I was fortunate. I never had to kill people for a living. So when I went to school, it was kind of like, so I had a teacher in high school who was an ex-chemical engineer who worked on missiles. He taught me physics. He was the one who introduced me to the entire idea of engineering. I had relatives who were engineers, relatives who were rocket scientists in Huntsville, Alabama, but I didn't really know anything about it. I went to family reunions with them. We didn't talk about it. But he was like, yeah, it's not just kind of the intersection of science and math. It's applied science. And on top of that, it's a good job. It's something that you don't need a graduate degree to get a job that has better than a living wage. And so that was a consideration of mine. But when I went to school, it was like, I'll do aerospace because I'm not going into the military. I'm not going to learn how to fly planes. Maybe I'll learn how they work. And maybe I can contribute in some way. And every step of the way since then, it's always been about, there's this overarching goal that's really remote. And that's probably not going to be possible, even though I try for it, but at least I can make a contribution. So, got into engineering thanks to the influence of that teacher. Almost quit engineering school 3 times because it's so difficult. But yeah, aerospace engineering wasn't something I had an idea about, or a really good understanding of the details until I got into the middle of it. And getting into NASA with that degree was also a long shot because there's just, relative to the rest of the aerospace field, NASA is a handful of jobs. The vast majority of aerospace engineering jobs are in defense. So I got lucky there again too, because I didn't have to, not only was I not in the military actively killing people, but I didn't go into a defense company where I was building the missiles or the aircraft or any of the other things that are designed for destruction. So yeah, it was a dream job while I was there. And in fact, NASA, I applied for and won a fellowship to go back to school and study planetary science. That's how I ended up here at the Keck Observatory. And that degree was really a result of, NASA's really good about continuing education. They had a professor come out from the University of Washington in St. Louis. His name's Michael Weissession. He taught a 3-day course for NASA engineers called Earth, Moon, and Mars. And I learned more in those 3 days about the planet that we live on and about the 2 targets that humans have moving away from the Earth than I had in my entire career up to that point. And I was as excited about planetary science as I was about aerospace engineering. And the big fact that I still remember to this day is when he told us that there's anywhere from 4 to 40 times as much water in the Earth's crust as there is in the oceans. And if it weren't for that water, we wouldn't have plate tectonics. So we wouldn't have earthquakes, moving plates, subduction, and volcanoes. And if it weren't for those things, we wouldn't have concentrations of metal in the crust that allow us to have sites where we can go to mine metals that we use in our technology. So there's this just so story almost about how everything has to be just perfect for life to exist on this planet. It fired my imagination. I got all the way through the coursework of the PhD in planetary science before a boss that I had at NASA at the time pulled the plug on it. And that abusive boss was the same reason I left NASA. But
remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that abusive boss and us having conversations about that. I never realized, I guess, when you were there that you were also getting your degree in planetary science. I just thought, again, in my mind, I didn't know it was an aerospace degree. In my mind, it was like, all right, he has his rocket scientist degree to launch the rockets, you know? So that's cool. But so it's interesting now because, again, all this stuff I didn't know certain things about this story previously, you know, growing up knowing you. Like, I didn't know that it really started out with like an affinity for just airplanes and things of that nature. But you did mention in the beginning saying that you did have a desire to be an astronaut, like going into college, I think. And because you mentioned something about the aerospace, something about the aerospace degree helping to be an astronaut or something like that, or was it the military?
Yeah, so the other way that you can get into the astronaut corps at NASA is if you are a shining star in whatever your field is. And they do, back during the shuttle program, you could send 7 people into space at a time. And so there was a much larger astronaut class every time they put out an application. Nowadays, you're sending anywhere from 3 to 4, depending upon the capsule that you're sending people up in. So astronaut classes are much smaller now. And they still hire from a lot of different fields, but typically you have to have an advanced technical degree and experience in that. So they'll do engineers, physicists, mathematicians. They very briefly had the Teachers in Space program, and that ended with the Challenger disaster. And then post Columbia, very late in the shuttle program, they finally did send up one more teacher. I'll have to look that up and see if I'm wrong there. But yeah, it was just... when I was in school, right before I graduated with my master's in aerospace at Tennessee, because I actually spent 7 years in Knoxville, was when the Columbia accident happened, February 1st, 2003. I graduated in August of 2004. And honestly, it was that disaster that put the space shuttle launches on pause and gave the engineers and management there the time to go and recruit people. I had been to the job fairs at the University of Tennessee for the 7 previous years, and NASA was never there. And this guy with white hair shows up, the last job fair of my 7-year career, hands me a sheet of paper to enter in a code on their website to apply for this job. And I learned later that he restricted that code to only alumni of the University of Tennessee because that's where he went to school.
Wow.
So it was like all of these things coming together. Like obviously that is nepotism because that job application was not available to everybody in the United States who qualifies. But that's what got my foot in the door. And if it hadn't been for the Columbia accident, NASA the Kennedy Space Center at least, probably would not have had a bit of a hiring spree because there were a lot of people that were so traumatized by that accident that they left. Once I got to NASA, as soon as I had enough work experience, I started applying for the astronaut program. I think I have applied 4 or 5 times now. And the furthest I got was actually right at the beginning. There are different measures. You can go online and do some research. There are different measures. NASA won't tell you, but based on their responses to your application, you can figure out how far along you get. And if they ask you to get an FAA certified flight physical, then you have made it to the top 10%. And that's the only time I made it to the top 10% was when the pool of applicants was about 3,000. And so I made it to the top 300 when they asked me to get a physical, never heard from them again. And then every time after that, the number of applicants has gone up, even though the number of spots has gone down. And so when you run the numbers, less than 600 people in the history of humanity have ever been into space. And that includes the people who...
less than 600 people, you said?
Yeah, less than 600. And that includes the people who passed the von Karman line, the people who passed the theoretical limit of space where you go up 100 kilometers or 60 miles, and you're still in the Earth's atmosphere, but that's the defining limit
Technical
that we have.
definition.
So people who have been in like high altitude aircraft, like the X-15, have gotten their astronaut wings. So when you look at that number, 600 people across all countries, including Russia, which is the one that has put up the most people along with the United States, the odds of becoming an astronaut are worse than winning the lottery. And so what I learned during my career at NASA was to be content with meeting astronauts, with being someone who makes sure that at least that my one little part of the space shuttle was running the best that I could humanly make it run, along with the team of engineers that I worked with, to keep them alive, to keep them safe as they traveled space. And it's the same thing. I never finished my PhD because I was pulled out of that program because many, many different reasons. My boss was upset that I applied for Mars One. He was upset that NASA was paying for my degree and giving me 20 hours off a week to actually do the research and go to class. But so I never got the PhD. I can't call myself a doctor. I can't call myself a scientist. I've never published a paper. But having that degree plus my experience in engineering is what qualified me to work as a maintenance and reliability engineer at the Keck Observatory. So I don't get to be the person who is reviewing the image data and making the Nobel Prize winning discoveries from what the Keck Observatory is able to do. but I can maintain the facility and make sure that the hydraulic bearing system and all of the other things that make the telescopes possible work. And so I can contribute to Nobel Prize winning science.
And that's, a big way of still being connected to just a very vast, essential aspect of life that, encompasses everything from our past, present, and future. I really like how you just outlined a lot of the luck and randomness involved throughout, your journey in life, all the way up until now as it relates to space. A lot of people, you know, want their lives or try to imagine or plan their lives exactly the way somebody else has, thinking that that's the only way, to reach that point. And a lot of them get discouraged. They, beat themselves up and they forfeit what could ultimately be a just invigorating, very empowering life journey towards something similar, something similar that somebody else has aimed and reached for in life. So in psychology, there's this concept called fundamental attributional error, which kind of just talks about our inclination to kind of look at our life situations just solely on the perspective of just personality and psychological, when in reality, a lot of what goes down in our experiences in life deals with a myriad of both external and internal factors. And I like, just how you outline growing up with the toys, interest in air flight, military, the Columbia incident, how it opened up windows and set off this domino effect of, you jumping into other endeavors. It's very true. And that's very realistic of just life in general. So I just found it humbling as you shared a bit of your journey with us just now, as far as how you ended up here and just how grateful you are, how appreciative you are, considering the number of ways, your life could have shot.
I really appreciate you saying that, because you get it, you understand. And people use the phrase rolling with the punches. A lot of times I didn't see the punches coming. And, when I resigned from NASA, I spent almost 3 years just kind of nursing my wounds. And we moved back in with my parents in Tennessee. And it wasn't until getting pregnant with our fourth kid that it was the precipitating event where my wife was like, okay, you've been the stay-at-home parent for the last 3 years while I worked. I want to be home for this baby. So can you look for another job? And, it was just like NASA. As soon as I started applying and getting rejected and applying and getting rejected, eventually the right position just fell into place. And I came out and interviewed for a different job than the one they gave me. When I got out here, there was a guy who was like, nope, I want this guy, and just poached me right out of the interview for a different position. I was going to be an instrument engineer and ended up a maintenance and reliability engineer. So I love that you use the word humility, because I've enjoyed proximity to space travel and to astronomy and science, because of, through the kind of the hard way. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm so great at being humble. 3 years of kind of being like, I can't believe this happened to me, and woe is me, it allowed me to get to the point where I said, you know what, nothing is guaranteed. There's nobody who. I spent 2 of those years and a lot of savings in a process of trying to get to the point where I could take NASA to court over the abuse that I faced, that management really enabled and stood behind this person, and nothing came of it. I just ended up poorer for it. And in hindsight, you're like, you know what? I could have been in the workforce and not running through my life savings over this time period. But everything is a learning process. And I'm fortunate to be where I am now. And the path that we take in life is really, like you said, there are so many external factors that you kind of have to cling to what your core values are Lean on the people that are in your life when things that you don't like happen to you. And then ultimately, eventually you get to this point where you look back and you say, people like to say things are for a reason. It's hard to go through them when they're things that are not the way that you want them to happen. But I mean, that abuse that I faced and that kind of mental anguish, and I'm still dealing with it. I know I still have echoes of that in my mindset. It got us here. The family is extremely happy. All the kids love being in Hawaii, and none of this would have happened if it hadn't been for that boss.
Hear that?
Hey, blessing in disguise. One simple way to put it. I have some more questions, but because you said some things that I think are a good segue into some specific space-related topics. But I want to give Jason a chance to comment on anything that was said thus far because he hasn't joined us yet in today's conversation.
Just thanks for the sharing, of course. Like, beautiful from everybody. But yeah, no, jump into it there, Armand.
Okay, so there's a few things.
More like 1,000 things.
More like 1,000 things. I'm just like, what space-related topic did we start at? But since you mentioned this, talking about so many conditions here on Earth, being just right, it reminded me of the Goldilocks zone, which the Earth is in, which is being a perfect distance away from its host star in order to support life. Mm-hmm. So I guess I can just use that. Well, I guess maybe you can because what I realize is a lot of people don't know a lot about space. Like, I consider my understanding and knowledge of space very, very basic. But then when I actually talk to other people who aren't like you, or someone like Tim, who just has a very kind of treats space as like a hobby, just, learning more and more and more about everything in regard to space. Many people don't know really anything. Like, if you ask most people, hey, what's the closest planet to the sun? Most people will be like, they'll just make a guess. Like, they won't know for sure. They might have an idea. They might be like, right?
And let me add to that. That was one of the first thoughts that I had too. That was one first thought. I was thinking about last night. I was like, yo, space is inseparable from our very existence. It's part of our physical makeup. It's in everything.
Literally speaking.
Our clothes, the poems we write, the books, the movies, the dreams, the hopes and motivations that help us mitigate joys in life. You bring up a good point, and it's crazy that despite that fact, it's amazing what a lot of the people we come across in life don't know, and on top of that, how it feels like we're so far behind where we should be. Go ahead, Armand, continue.
And it's just interesting because I would say my desire to be an astronaut maybe wasn't strong as yours at one point, but one of the first books my mom gave me was a space book. And I think it was just about our solar system specifically. But I just remember it said space on it and then something. And I had it when I was 6. It was one of those big picture books, but it also had a lot of writing in it as well. I just remember just being fascinated by it because I'm as a 6-year-old, I barely understand what the planet is. So now I'm trying to understand that there's something outside of our planet, and the planet's in this thing called space, and space is unimaginably, inconceivably large. And, there's things called stars, and then there's planets, and then there's black holes, and then there's dark matter. And then maybe the book probably didn't talk about dark matter, but you get my point. My mind was literally shocked. So for me, it was literally a treasure trove of infinite information that you can just go and find out cool information about. But it's just very interesting to me that most people just have this indifference towards anything space related. And when I feel it's kind of inherently something that I think people will naturally, no pun intended, gravitate towards. So I guess, if we're just going to start on any space related topic, I guess maybe I can ask this question. So I'll start with Fermi's paradox. So knowing that Earth is in the Goldilocks zone, meaning it's a perfect distance away from the sun to its host star to support life, and knowing how infinitely large space is, and the calculations to how many planets are in the Goldilocks zone, which can support life and then therefore support intelligent life, why is it that there's such this high probability that there's extraterrestrial life, yet we have yet to, again, outside of people say we have encountered it, but universally agreed and accepted beyond a shadow of a doubt, made first contact with an extraterrestrial species?
I love this question because we can go in so many different directions. And I'm hoping that we're able to hit on a lot of the different ideas the first thing I want to do is take an aside, because the majority of the people that we run into are our fellow Americans when we're talking about these topics. And
are what? Sorry, you broke up a little bit.
The majority of the people we run into when we're talking about this, when you say, hey, you go up and ask somebody on the street, what's the closest planet to the sun, are our fellow Americans. And our education system is not where it should be for a country with the amount of wealth that this country has. And so I think that there is not just educational issues, but there are also cultural issues, because when you have such an individualistic culture and a culture that's focused on materialism and money, it's just not a concern for a lot of people. Not to mention the fact that the economic system makes it where the vast majority of Americans are scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, and they have no opportunity to even take a breath, much less pursue some sort of hobby in terms of subjects that they study. It's all that they can do to make ends meet. A lot of times ends aren't met. We have a huge homeless population that is by design. So as an example, when I was doing outreach for NASA, I had a guy come up to one of the booths that I was doing at an air show in Cocoa Beach. And it was this German guy who works in an automotive factory in Stuttgart. And he had some of the most piercing questions about the space program that I had ever heard inside or outside of NASA. He had a better understanding of the ins and outs of the space shuttle than a lot of the people that I worked with. And so I think that if we look outside of the United States, we might find more interest in space, and definitely people who are better versed in a lot of the facts about space. But on to Fermi's paradox. The simplest answer that I can provide is coming back to Tim's idea of humility. We need to take the perspective of a geologist in this. If you ever study geology, something that professors will try to get you to understand is the concept of geologic time. When we look at the Earth being 4.5 billion years old, I don't know if you ever saw Neil deGrasse Tyson's version of Contact.
Yes.
But if you lay out the history of the Earth on a calendar and you look at how long humanity has been around, you're talking about a fraction of the last second of 11:59:59 midnight on the end of the year. So we are a blip in the history of the Earth, and I think that it is hubristic to think that we understand enough about the universe, having only had half a century since we even got to space, or a little bit over a century since we developed radio telecommunication, to believe that we have enough information or knowledge to definitively say one way or the other that we aren't absolutely immersed in evidence of other civilizations. We just have no ability to parse it.
Literally, you saw my show notes that I wrote, right? That was one of my questions. Is like, because there's a I'm gonna correct me if I mispronounce the name, the Kardashev something scale, which pretty much outlines Kardashev. I always get Kardashev scale, which pretty much outlines the level that each civilization can be at based off of how it's utilizing its solar system. Its galaxies. Resources. So we're not even a type 1 civilization yet. Okay, we're on our way to becoming a type 1 civilization, because the type 1, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're able to 100% utilize all of the resources of our own host planet, which we have not done yet. Correct? That's type 1.
Right. That's type 1, and Carl Sagan was aware of almost everything that there was to know about astronomy and cosmology in his time. And he actually ran some calculations where he estimated that humanity is right now at about 70% of the way towards a type 1 civilization in terms of our energy utilization. And there are many different ways to define it. I like the idea of defining it as utilizing the amount of energy that falls on a planet from its host star. And so that's type 1. And then type 2 is using all of the energy of your host star in every direction. And then type 3 is just
the galaxy, right?
The whole galaxy. Higher than that, because then you're talking about a jump in energy on the order of 100 to 200 billion for the Milky Way galaxy, because then you would be able to use all the energy of your galaxy. Now, I think
Type 4 and Type 5 are like almost just imperceivable, really. Like, I feel like Type 3 is like the best we can get, like sci-fi, fantasy-wise. Like, okay, we can kind of like begin to sort of kind of imagine a Type 3, but then Type 4 and Type 5 is like, just for the record, Type 5 is like you have the ability to create a universe. It's like, okay, just stop pretending like we can conceive that, you know?
And then, I mean, Isaac Asimov has a short story about that. Where he basically, the very first thing that once this civilization develops an AI and the AI takes off and becomes universal, that the very first thing that AI says when it creates a new universe is let there be light. And so this idea has been around for a while, but I have to say, when we look out and survey galaxies, we have yet to find a galaxy that has anything like a Dyson sphere at the galactic scale. And every time people have thought that they've found Dyson spheres around stars, it's turned out to have a more realistic physical-based explanation. So I think we might be like, okay, one of the most important things that I learned in engineering school was not to extrapolate. So we have a set of data and we can interpolate between data points, and then you're usually going to be correct. The curve is going to fall along that line of interpolation. Just draw a line between the 2 points that you know, and if it's something in between, you're good. Extrapolating is when you take the data that you have and you say, I'm going to run out the other side of the axis and assume that the line keeps the same curvature, and then start making statements about what's going to happen in the future or what's going to happen far away from where I've sampled the data, and take those statements to be true. One example of that is when people say that based on the current expansion of the universe due to dark energy, that we're eventually going to have the thermodynamic heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
And I don't buy that at all. There are some very prominent physicists who have even written books about it. And it just seems to me to be like, you're extrapolating data. We know that the expansion rate of the universe in the past has changed, and we don't know why. And we can't even tell what dark energy is that's causing the increasing rate of expansion. And you mean to tell me that you think that the rate that we have right now is going to remain constant for infinity, to the point where everything spreads far enough away that everything ends up at 2 Kelvin? I don't buy it.
Exactly, because at one point, I forgot how long ago it was, but the rate of universe expansion accelerated. Again, we don't know why. It just accelerated. I forgot exactly about how much, to the point where we're at now. And it's like, if that can happen once, it can happen again. Theoretically, it could slow down again. Yeah. So I like your point about extrapolation, because for me, I don't know nothing about, in regard to the science, right? Like, I can understand the concept of redshift. I can't do the science behind it. So I can understand a lot of the concepts related to space, but sometimes I feel like, as an amateur space lover, that like if something like the heat death of the universe, I might hear that, I'm like, nah, I don't think that makes sense. Like, I'm not buying it. But it's like, I don't have like the scientific acumen to like even begin to disprove it. Why? I can just be like, conceptually, I don't agree. One of the reasons why is I think it relies on, again, a lot of these assumptions that we're making. But back to your own point, we're just now beginning to like discover. So, I mean, we're just now beginning to discover space, right? Like, again, human beings have only been an air quotes intelligent civilization for so long, and then you jump to the point where by which we've actually, in a universal academic sense, really start to study space. It's like, why are we making like these, again, everything's based off of theory, right? You have to make theories, you have to make assumptions, but I think there's a difference between making assumptions and then building theories where you're extrapolating so much information from said assumptions, right? So it's like, for me, conceptually, I'm always like, I don't know about this, I don't know about that, but then I don't really feel like I have the credibility to like probably dispute like a theory such as the heat death of the universe, because I don't have any of the scientific or academic credibility to do so.
Well, you don't need to have a degree in science or to be a scientist to understand scientific history. And scientific history is over and over teaching us that we should never assume that we are at the end of science. People in Newton's time, when Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientific minds in history, released Principia Mathematica and had all of these explanations for people, not just his 3 laws, and not just inertia, not just gravitation, everything that he learned about optics. And I have to make an aside here, because he loved the number 7, which is why he said indigo was a color of the rainbow, but it is not. There are 6 colors of the rainbow, not 7. But his contemporaries were so enamored with him that the idea basically was that all of science was settled, and we just have to figure out a few more things that we don't understand about light, and then we'll be good. We can just live the rest of our lives, and science will be a dead subject. And then Einstein comes along and says, oh, well, that stuff you didn't know about light, here's the concept of space-time. Here's how gravitation fits into it. This is what relativity is. If you approach the speed of light as a massive object, your mass will increase exponentially to the point where it reaches infinity. You've got examples with Bernoulli as well. Bernoulli develops the theories of fluid mechanics. And then we have technology that starts pushing us faster and faster through the atmosphere. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, well, if you take Bernoulli's equations to the speed of sound, then drag goes to infinity. So that's why it's a sound barrier. We can't get past it. The drag goes infinite. And then the Bell X1, Chuck Yeager, they push through. And it turns out, oh, well, Bernoulli's equations fall apart in the transonic regime. We didn't even know what the transonic regime was. We didn't know that the drag goes down, then you cross through Mach 1, and then it increases at a different rate than it did in incompressible and then compressible flow. So as we move forward with science, what we understand today always ends up getting bookended by what we learn in the future. So you'd be a fool at any point in the history of science or physics to say, my understanding should be extrapolated in all directions in all dimensions.
Exactly. So let me say this to kind of going back to the beginning of the question. So do you think, going back to the scale, if there was a type 3 or 4 civilization, could they be pretty much, even let's say present in our Milky Way galaxy, but we're just either one of two things, just not intelligent enough to perceive it, or our fundamental conceptualization about what an intelligent life form may look like is so flawed, or based off so many assumptions based off the way we think intelligent life has to look, that it's not really a matter of how intelligent we are. It's just like, if we just perceive the way we're looking at intelligent life differently, we would see that, oh, there is an extraterrestrial civilization in our midst.
You hit the nail on the head. My answer to the Fermi paradox is that not only are we far too young in our understanding of the universe, we're far too anthropocentric. And so to borrow once again from what Tim was talking about, concepts in psychology, we project our understanding of ourselves onto the universe. And so that's why we're looking for Earth-like planets around other stars. We have only one data point, and the data point is ourselves. And yet we're extrapolating that all other life in the universe is going to look like us, or that we are the only form of life. The universe is sufficiently complex and sufficiently infinite. As Baha'is, we believe from what Baha'u'llah says that it is infinite, that there are possibilities that necessarily and statistically, mathematically supersede our understanding.
Exactly.
So not only have we not developed a robust enough scientific arm of humanity such that we have armies of people exploring the universe through astronomical observation, not just physically getting space probes to other planets in our solar system or getting humans to nearby bodies in space. But I envision a world in which every human's needs are met, and then every human who has the desire to go after studying what is outside the Earth has the ability and the time to do so. And when we have that army of astronomers whose needs are met, we will have enough eyeballs and brains to put on the data that we have, because every direction that you look away from the Earth into space, there's something new to find. Astronomy is uncovering weird, quirky things and unanswered questions every single day. And there's a limited number of people who get paid to think about it and to figure those things out. Exactly. So we project ourselves onto the universe and think that other things have to be like us. I mean, it makes sense to look for things that are like us if you have limited resources. But we also, those limited resources keep us from doing an adequate enough survey to where we can say, oh, we've looked at every single spectra. We've looked at every single wavelength of light in every direction, and we can characterize the things that we don't understand and can say definitively that we're the only civilization.
Exactly. I know Tim has a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions too, but I'm gonna let Tim ask one because I won't stop. I'll just go through like my list of 50, and then I'll be done. Go ahead,
one
Tim.
of the things I was thinking about, you guys were talking about this, is how exciting it is to answer these and think about these big questions and mysteries about the universe, especially in light of the fact of how fast we have learned and accumulated as much knowledge about life, but about space, in general, in such a short amount of time. And, with me, I have a habit of, not learning the lesson of Hakuna Matata. I kind of like to sit and float around previous discoveries for for till the end of time. The Voyager missions in the 70s is still something that I like to kick back and go into a coma over, because of just how fantastic at the time it was, finally seeing pictures of these planets in our solar system. And when I think about life in general, I have a hard time trying to think of intelligent life versus just microbial life. Microbes, I'm excited if we find a germ.
Yeah.
It is such a big deal. It was such a big deal when we were discovering life that we previously thought was impossible to live here on our Earth, whether it's deep underground,
In
in extreme places. So I'm still buzzed, and got goosebumps just over that. So it's just exciting that on one end, we're answering questions that may be widely interpreted as just, absolutely like just, beyond, maybe the type where people be like, oh, settle down a little bit, settle down. We'll get there. We'll get there. Let's come back down. We've just discovered these things. Let's sit on it. Let's work with it. Let's continue our way. And then on the opposite spectrum, you have these, discoveries of geological processes still going on in the outer solar system we're just happening upon. There's just so much to learn, to relearn, to sit on, and just be, enthused about. And a point I want to place emphasis on as well is that everything, what I'm saying, not just space, everything, according to an African American woman historian who's the host of a YouTube series. I don't know if it's called Big Think. I forgot what it was, but she said something that always stuck with me, is that we should always look at everything, language, everything as an ongoing process, where we think a journey ends is actually just the beginning of another. And I've always thought that was just a very core key element to just a very healthy outlook on many things in life, to help us remain very humble, empathetic, and just open to the possibilities and underlying reasons why something is unfolding or going on in life. It's just all so exciting. I think that's what makes space for me such a endless, never ending joy, even on its very small aspects. Very fascinating.
You said the exact word that I was going to say, which is unfolding. Our civilization is never ending and constantly unfolding. Our understanding of the universe is constantly unfolding. Everything about what we do, our religion is constantly unfolding.
Yes.
And even the universe itself is in the process of unfolding on vastly different timescales than our civilization is. So that, once again, coming back to your word, that humility, that's baked in. That's, when in the Baha'i writings it talks about, I've created the universe for your education. That says it all to me. we are living in this reality so that we can learn. And part of that learning is to be humble and let things unfold, and do not assume that you know everything or that you've ever reached the end.
That's right.
Exactly. I'm glad that you guys are both bringing up humility too, because for me as a young kid, just trying to imagine the sheer scale of the universe was like a humbling thought process within itself too, because it's like there's something this big, this vast, this inconceivably complex. It's like, to me, it's just inherently humbling. It's like, how can I, just as a little Armand, little black kid living most of my life in Tampa, Florida, like, how can I think of myself as, or even like my neighborhood, my family, like, how can I think of anything as that significant, so that it's significant from the perspective of that I'm going to think about my needs and myself at the expense of everything else, when, like, aren't we all just here trying to figure out what the hell is happening in the first place?
It's transcending.
Exactly. It's like, and to me, it's like space, like is what it does to me is like, it doesn't it point us in that direction, like, hello, what are we all doing here? Like, what's the purpose of everything? Like, honestly, if there's some way we can imagine Earth just like existing and we had no concept because we weren't smart enough, or like literally there was a barrier at the top of the sky, like, a lot of things would make sense to me about the way societies, nations, people behave, in their day-to-day life. And but since everyone knows space exists, it's like that, it's like so conspicuous to me. It's like, hey guys, like, wait a second, like, why are we spending our time like on a lot of stupid stuff, wasting money and resources on a lot of stupid stuff that ultimately lead to our destruction? You were talking about that earlier, like happy and feeling so lucky and blessed, and there's still a sense of humility within you that you were, through chance, kind of led away from destruction and living a life in the military to becoming more of a scientist and an investigator and a researcher and a lover of the truth, which your career in space has led you to. And it's like, that was like another thing that I don't think people realize. Like, we went to the moon 52 years ago, 1969. Do we know how much we've grown in our scientific and technological understanding and what we would be capable of doing if only we had universal, like, a universal consensus about what is important and what is not? If there was unity among the nations and we all put our energy and our time and our money towards space explorations and space research, how much more we would know. I think oftentimes we think that certain limitations that we have when it comes to our knowledge of things has to do with like the fact that we're just not there yet, when in reality the capacity is present, but there's other things interfering with that capacity from manifesting itself. And to just give an example, we live in this world where there's money. It has utility. It's what gets things done. And I'm not gonna say, it's funny because I've been Bitcoin is all the buzz right now, and if you like actually research what Bitcoin is, it fundamentally changes the way you think about money, and you realize actually that money as we know it now is really the illusion, and Bitcoin's actually like more fundamentally what money is supposed to do and represent. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that money is a huge issue as to why we are where we currently are in regard to space research and space exploration. It's called like a budget and how much the government is allocating towards these things. And when you have all this money going towards one thing you said, military and defense contracts and things that lead to destruction, it's like, how can we expect things that don't lead to our destruction but lead to our ultimately lead to our prosperity? Of course, that process is going to be hindered because, again, we're not doing what needs to be done in order to facilitate the growth of that process. So it's just sad to know that there's another. I think again, going back to some Baha'i writings, why universal education is so important. Certain things like cancer is something that destroys families, destroys people's lives. And it's something that obviously, if you ask anyone, hey, do you want to get rid of cancer? Everyone would say yes immediately, right? Color me stupid, but I think that if we had unity established, the cure for cancer would have been discovered a long time ago. How do we know there's not some kid in some undeveloped or developing country that doesn't have the idea that's going to lead to the it's going to lead to the cure for cancer, yet that person is denied access to education because of some stupid geopolitical reasoning. So it's really sad when you think about like ultimately what I think we all here believe our purpose to be here on this earth, and how so much of that is connected to space and space research, and how we're prevented from doing so, even though we have the capacity to be so much further along, just because of societal reasons.
Right. So there are so many things. I wish I had written down everything that you just said, because there are so many things that we could touch on. I want to take that idea from the beginning that considering space brings along humility, and to say that what we have to do is keep that in the forefront of our minds so that it affects our actions, not just our outlook, but the way that we treat other people. If you have that perspective, and if we can make sure that that perspective is shared, then these things sort of happen automatically. That's why you don't change society or governments from the top down. You change it from the bottom up, one heart at a time. And so the one of the concepts, if you follow Ron Garan, an astronaut on Twitter, he talks about the overview effect, the feeling that he had the first time that he went to space, saw the Earth. It becomes incontrovertible. When you see the Earth from space and you see that it is one thing sitting by itself, floating out in the middle of everything, scientifically, what's the word? Tangibly, you understand the unity of every single living thing on Earth, and most especially the one human family. He uses the phrase one human family all the time. Now, it took this guy being a lottery winner and becoming an astronaut and getting to space to have that realization. But that realization can come from what you and I have been talking about, and just considering space as a concept. Now, it's not for everybody. Not everybody's excited about it as we are, but we need to start at the bottom. Like, part of the reason that these societal ills that allow us to spend 67% of the discretionary budget of the United States, which is over $1 trillion, on defense contracts, and less than 1% on NASA, when NASA has the highest rate of return of any government agency in existence, is because we are hamstringing ourselves. And it's not just, I don't want to put the blame on us as individuals. I put the blame squarely on the people who are currently in power and the people who have all the money, who have set the system up to benefit themselves. It is a rigged system, and it survives and maintains and exists to make billionaires richer, to keep everyone else poor and sick and in the dark. If we can find a way through mutual aid, through core activities, through meeting the needs of every child that's born on this planet, just to have people not be suffering in illness and poverty, then build education on top of that, these sorts of things, like accelerating the rate at which we understand space, getting humans off the Earth and doing space exploration, they will come naturally, because the majority of people will have in their hearts an understanding of the brotherhood of humanity and of the importance of why we are in this universe, and not about building wealth, not about othering other people, not about building war machines and destroying our fellow man.
Exactly.
Yeah, everything small is connected to everything that's big, which is why I'm glad you started off today with us and describing your journey to where you are now as it relates to space, showing that the everyday life ongoings is just as significant as, the great discoveries and leaps we're making in these fields of science. And I can have always appreciated inspiration and empowerment. Bill Nye, Carl Sagan, Neil, part of the reason why I love them is that they somehow, through their experience, but also through their understanding of life, was able to, make my ups and downs in my everyday life, seem somehow real connected to what they were talking about over many programs throughout the decades and stuff, and documentaries, and make me feel as if like I'm just a part of, what they're discovering and what they're doing,
That's right. That's inclusivity. We are not just in the universe. We are the universe.
Right. Exactly. And I think that it's very important that as we express more vulnerability and our focus shifts considerably to, who we are fundamentally as humans, it's like I just said, it's going to be natural. It's going to be, everything's going to click. It's going to be just very understanding. I feel like a lot of us are going to be like, damn, wasted so much time.
Hey, I want to say this real quick because I know that unfortunately, because it took us so long to start this episode, that you only have a few minutes left. And I'm just going to say this right now, audience. If you're listening, he's coming back. We're going to have a multi-part series about space because we've only touched the surface on the things we have begun talking about. And there's so many other things that I also want to talk about that I know Tim wants to talk about, that I know Jason is going to listen to us talk about, because I don't know what me, Tim, and George here all being this big of space nerds, how much Jason's gonna be able to get a word in. But I want to talk about this, and I'll just say, going back to that astronaut, I got that feeling just looking at the pale blue dot.
Yes,
for the first time.
The Voyager.
When I saw that,
yes,
when I saw that photo, I cried. I forgot. I don't know how old I was. I just remember crying. Like, is this? It's so humbling. And to me, what it is, and this is the segue to my last question. It's excuse me, something in my throat. It's irrefutable proof of intelligent design, irrefutable proof that we have a creator. Because you cannot convince me, if you begin to think about the magnitude of space and the complexity of space, that this is by sheer accident. And I think there's more people in the scientific community that are starting to come to this consensus as well and understand that this amount, that pretty much the universe inherently leads to the answer to the question of, is there a creator? And there has to be yes, because there can't be an accident of this scale, So I guess that's my question to you. And I know the answer is more so for the audience. Why to you is the existence of the universe in space proof of a creator?
We're going to have to get into that one in the next episode. I got to take the baby.
Okay. Well, yeah, honestly, look, it's kind of good because everyone's like, oh, Armand, your episodes are so long. Why don't you shorten them down a bit? An hour and a half is too long. Well, look, next time Homeboy comes on the podcast, the episode might be 2 to 3 hours. So just a warning, we're going to have a multi-part series on space, and I'm not concerned one bit about how long these episodes are, because I'm going to be swimming in the sauce. So yeah, thanks for coming on, Tim. I don't know if you had if you did the writing this time. If you want to send them off,
yeah. Did you and Jason want to put in your final word before
I'm done. I don't have any more final words. I mean, Jason has said like 3 words this entire thing. So if Jason wants to say something, let Jason come on and say something.
Thanks everybody for the passion. For the passion, everything. A lot of beautiful concepts were shared and elaborated on, and no need for me to say more than that. Blessings to everyone, to the families, all you there in your various places in the globe. So until the next one.
My last words would be this. Anyone who's not familiar with space, doesn't know too much about it, spend some time. It can only be 10 minutes. Just do some research and start to just investigate and explore it and just see what it does for you. It may do absolutely nothing, but I think a lot of you may be surprised of how you feel this sense of natural curiosity, and will lead you to study more and more. And I'm interested to find out, even though I won't, because again, I'm not going to know every person who does this, but interested to find out, what it does for you and what it makes you think about, and if it changes your perspective of anything. So, Tim.
All right, peoples. Your boy Big Tim of the 206 here. Probably every episode we have a special guest. I'll try to share with our audience and co-host and guest a very deep, wisdomatic, poetic end statement that encapsulates what we were talking about in related topics. So without any regard here, let me go ahead. Space. Whether it's the one the 206 brings or the one all of our hearts hold for those we love, every space we find ourselves in is a space worth sharing. Growing up, my desire was to be in my own world, living as close to space as I possibly could through lifelong use of telescopes and lifelong studies. But I found out that if we actually want to reach the stars, there are spaces here and now that need to be breached. Spaces between all of us that are as empty as tears with nothing to fall on, but are as beautiful as 1,000 sunsets across 1,000 worlds. Each and every single one of us is truly a universe unto itself, where love qualifies us all to be an astronaut to each other. And listening, deeply listening to each other, is truly interstellar travel. Appreciation to our guest, listeners, and co-host. Much love and peace.
George, any final words?
That was beautiful.
I think he... Oh, okay. I was about to say, he dipped already. Hey, but with that, thank you once again for tuning in to today's episode. As I said, if this interested you at all, we have many, many, many more space episodes coming, or just maybe one giant long one, which we are not limited by time. That being said, catch you guys on the flip side. Peace.
Deuces.